Hi, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite things with technology in the classroom, and that is screencasting. If screencasting would have been a thing when I was in school and I was in science class like chemistry, I probably would have done so much better than how I actually did, because I was one of those students who really had a hard time grasping concepts just by hearing a lecture once. And I think that's the reason why I like to screencast so much and why I like to utilize them, because I was once that student who would have really benefited from using screencasts. So the major way that I use screencasts in my class is to go over material that we went over in class and to also show solutions for homework. So the first reason I use screencasting is to kind of review and refresh things that we've done in class. So for example, today in my general science class, we went over the parts of the atom and how you can calculate different subatomic particles, which are the protons, the neutrons, and electrons, based on the information that you get from the periodic table. This is often a concept that is really hard for some students to understand conceptually, because you can't look at an atom necessarily. Most of the time we're relying on models to look at those. And by looking at the periodic table, which is a reference system, you have to know kind of what all the numbers mean and how they're used to calculate those subatomic particles. So for some students, it takes just one time seeing it to be able to understand how to do it. But for others, I noticed today I got those blank stares of I have no idea what's going on. And I can relate to that because I was the kid blank staring at my teacher like, what is going on? So for today's lecture, what we did is that I screencasted the materials yesterday and put them up on our Schoology page. So that way, when my kids go home, if they're at home and like, I really don't understand what we did today in class, I'm not really sure what exactly we're following, they can kind of review that lecture material from previous and kind of refamiliarize yourself with it. I think it's also a really good way of presenting information that students can study with. So if I screencast my lectures, a lot of times students are like, I don't remember you saying that in class, or I don't remember that from the notes we took that day. I don't remember you saying that. If they are able to watch the screencasts as a way of reviewing that material, not only is it more engaging than trying to read something from a book for a lot of kids, but being able to watch that and see me exactly what I'm doing to solve those problems is really, really helpful. So normally when I screencast, what exactly I'm using is very similar to what's used in Khan Academy. So if you look at, let's say, Khan Academy videos, so right now I'm going to look at atoms, compounds, and ions, very similar to what I'm doing. There's a lot of different screencasts that is available from Khan Academy. So let's say we're looking at elements and atoms, okay? So this screencast, which I'm just going to mute, what exactly they do is that they speak over it with whatever information is available, and then they use a pointer as well as writing tools. So you're able to write through Khan Academy to kind of emphasize what it is that you're talking about. So you'll see here that he's done that with different colors and all that stuff. So what I use is my iPad to make my screencast, and I cast that onto my computer. So that way I have full access using my stylus to be able to write on my slides. So I upload my slides to an app called Notability, which allows me to write over the slides, highlight things, show techniques about how I would solve things, so a student can kind of see how exactly it works to solve something. So very similar to how Saul Khan makes all of his screencasts, that's how I make mine, and that's what I think is best for my students. The other thing that I try to do with screencasting is I try to keep them relatively short, and that's discussed on this article here. I believe it was this one. There's a lot of different ways that you can use screencasts. I've also used them for showing procedures. So in my science classes, oftentimes we'll use probes that are plugged in through Vernier software, and sometimes they're difficult to get working or get the settings right or get your graph set up correctly. So what I'll do is I'll screencast, and from my computer, I'll show them exactly how to do all those different things that they'll need to do to set up for the lab. But here it is. So screencasts, a short couple of minutes, I believe on this page as well, or maybe this one. Oh, here we go. Mini lectures, generally 10 to 15 minutes. Homework solutions, 10 to 15 minutes, going over those examples, how to solve things, how to work examples, how to work problems. And then mini lectures, which are 5 to 8 minutes. Now, something like today's class, where I lectured for almost the entire part of class, even though there were examples and questions and sort of interactive things involved with it, still the length of that lesson is rather lengthy. So what I do is I use, and what I'm using right now, is this Screencastify extension, which limits me to only 10 minutes. So what I can do is that if I've exceeded that 10-minute limit, I can chunk that lesson into different parts. So that way, when students are viewing it, they don't have a 35-minute long video to watch. They have different chunks that they can do. So if they're saying, I don't really remember what we did at the beginning of the lecture, watch the first video. I don't really remember what we went over at the end of the lecture, watch the last one. So by having it kind of chunked, I think it makes it a little bit easier for students to access. And I think it also makes it a little bit more prone for students to access because it's not going to be such a long video. And I have noticed that for some students who like to use it, it's usually those students who are kind of those ones who are very worried about whether or not they're understanding the material, even though they probably are the ones understanding. But I like giving the access to all my students and putting it on Schoology so that way, if they choose to use it, they can. If not, that's cool too. But basically, I've also done a lot of sort of diving into screencasting and sort of the flipped classroom approach, especially in science, because you look at science as being this really lab-based course, especially something like chemistry. But to understand what the lab is meaning and what exactly you're doing in the lab, you really have to understand the theory behind it. And a lot of times that theory can just get dull and boring and hard to sit through in a class. So I've looked into the options of a flipped classroom as a way to present that lecture-based material and having it screencasted. And there's a lot of different options I've looked into, but the general feedback I get from students is that they would be more prone to watch a screencast and take notes from there and try to get that material to then come into class the next day and practice those things that would normally be homework. The other thing with screencasting that I really like about it is that in science, especially in chemistry, you're doing a lot of problem solving, which students have really not had a whole lot of experience with, except for in math class. All the sciences prior to this course is things like life science and earth and space science. A lot of sciences that are memorization based, which isn't that difficult. It's rote memorization. But when you get to chemistry and physics, those are all very conceptual type things where you need to problem solve to be able to get your solutions. So a lot of those problem solving techniques, students just aren't that good at yet. So I'll make screencasts to kind of model what that problem solving technique looks like for, let's say, balancing a chemical reaction. And by seeing how I'm doing it and how I, as the teacher, go through problem solving it, a lot of students find watching that repetitively or as they find necessary to help them sort of solidify that understanding of the material. But in general, I am obsessed with screencasts. I love them. And the other thing I really like about them is that for me, I don't script them. I'm like right now, as we're talking, I'm just talking about what I like about screencasts and trying to keep it as organized as I can. Normally when I'm screencasting notes, I'm using a slideshow to kind of keep my thoughts organized. But I think what's also nice about screencasting is that it isn't so robotic. When my students see me in class and hear me in class, I'm very animated. I'm a very excitable kind of teacher. So I like to include that also with my screencast. So that way students are kind of still having that feeling, that connection that I'm the one who's teaching them that material, not necessarily a stranger that they don't really know or a robot who is not even a living being. I find that aspect of screencasting is quite nice. But anyway, I find that screencasting is really helpful. I don't screencast everything I do, but a lot of those harder topics, like learning how to count subatomic protons or subatomic particles like we do in class today, I find that using a screencast is really helpful. So if you're interested in talking about screencasting or some of the tools that I use when making my screencasts, I have a lot of different ones. I use a lot of different tools. I'd be happy to talk with you about them because it's one of my favorite things about technology in the classroom.